My name's Pray for Enemy, and this is your September polling update. So this one's going to be a little bit different. Usually I go over national polls as well as Iowa and New Hampshire, but because no new polls have come out in Iowa and New Hampshire since the debate, and I already went over those in my pre-debate video, you can just go ahead and watch those videos if you want an update on those two states. But there are 7 new national polls, so those are definitely worth looking at. So, let's just get right into it. Still in first place, it's Doug Burgum. I'm just kidding. It's Donald Trump, obviously, at 53% of the vote. He's still number one, and he hasn't moved that much during the debate. Right, it was he skipped out on the debate. It was debatable whether or not he would see a increase or a decrease in the polls. He increased about 1% and change, and that's basically just staying flat for him. I don't see any big shakeups in Donald Trump's support as of right now. And in fact, this little bit that he's gone up, I think, is attributable to another round of sort of media attention that his sort of legal troubles have gotten him. But even though this guy's in first place right now, I don't see him as completely indestructible. Yeah, I think he's definitely the large favorite for the Republican nomination, but there's a lot of room for people to make some inroads. In fact, Ron DeSantis in a poll was like only 3% behind him in a direct head-to-head. Remember, the hardcore Trump base makes about 33% of the Republican voter set. The New York Times had this really interesting article where they sort of polled the entire GOP, and sort of what they found is that about 33 to 37%, probably no more than 37%, are loyalists to Trump. They're diehard Trump supporters, okay? So even though he's at 53.6 right now, I think that can drop depending on how many people want to move off of him, right? His core base of support is probably hovering around 33% or 30%, somewhere around there. And there's also a possibility that Trump just gets moved out of the way. You can check out my video on the Federalist Society for more details on that. At number 2, we have Ron DeSantis. Big drop off for Ron DeSantis. He's 5 points down from where he was last month. That's a 26% change. And I don't mean to toot my own horn, but I think this really supports the conclusion that I made in my post-debate breakdown. Because Ron DeSantis was the most clear alternative to Donald Trump, I think he had a hold over the establishment media and over media attention because he just seemed like the only guy who was interesting enough to talk about. But after this debate, he had a very flat performance. He didn't do bad by any stretch of the imagination, but a lot of people did a lot better than him. And so I think that this media attention is being taken away from Ron DeSantis and shifting to other places. There's a lot of people further down on this list who have seen a major rise up in the polls, and so you can ask yourself, where is that support coming from? Well, it's not coming from Donald Trump. Donald Trump actually saw an increase in the polls. It's coming from Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is losing poll numbers by basically death by 1,000 cuts is what this scenario is. Vivek's taking a little bit. Nikki Haley's taking a little bit. And so it's really hard. He doesn't have that control over the media narrative anymore. And that's really why I think he was one of the biggest losers from last night's debate, and I think the poll numbers bear this out. At number 3, we have Vivek Ramaswamy at 7.3% of the shares, and he is up 35% from where he was last month. The reason why I think Vivek Ramaswamy was the winner of the debate was because he had that national introduction that he was desperately hoping for, and he's been getting a lot of media attention after that, so I reckon that his name ID has gone up quite a bit, and his poll numbers should bear that out. But for me, the big question mark around Vivek Ramaswamy is he going to be able to sustain the momentum? Now that he has this national profile, he's going on Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, he's going all over the place in terms of earned media is what they call it. He's had some interactions where I think he comes out on top, and then he has other interactions where it seems like he's just flailing, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. We'll see if he can sort of pivot his messaging a little bit or maybe tweak the way that he gets his messaging across, because again, I think that it's a open question whether or not he's going to have more media dubs than media losses moving forward. At number 4, we have Nikki Haley with 4.9% of the vote, and the second biggest increase in the polling numbers after the debate with a 32% increase. Now, I think for Nikki Haley, it's less about the numbers in the polls and more about the donor base. If you're an establishment Republican, if you're part of that donor set of the Republican Party, you're really going to like Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley is going to be your candidate. And so because of that, I think that she's going to get a lot of donor money moving forward. Her fundraising numbers are going to be a big asset for her moving forward. She's going to be able to run more ads. The campaign is going to get a lot easier. And I think that's one of the reasons why Nikki Haley was one of the winners of the debate. I think her goal was to come out as the best candidate from South Carolina, right? Because I see her and Tim Scott as very sort of interchangeable commodities when it comes to the lane that they're trying to fill in this Republican primary. And she is obviously the better candidate out of those two. So that's all I have to say about Nikki Haley. At number 6, we have Christie sitting at 2.5%, and he basically just hasn't moved since the debate. And that makes sense because he's the only candidate in that sort of lane that's like the never Trumper Republicans. And so he might have maxed out that lane as far as we know. But, that raises a question. How big is the never Trumper Republicans? I mean, it's really difficult to tell, but if it's only 2.4%, 2.5%, then Christie's going to have a really tough time moving forward. And also, are they all voting for Christie, or are they willing to vote for another Republican, right? Like, it's too difficult to know right now. Last but not least, we have Tim Scott sitting at 2.4% of the share. Again, he also had a very, very, very bad debate performance. I think other than Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum, he had the weakest debate performance. I would expect his poll numbers to keep dropping. Again, him and Nikki Haley are really interchangeable commodities in my mind, and I think that as Nikki Haley gets more attention from the donor side of the Republican Party and sort of that more, establishment lane, then I think that we'll see him sort of fade into the distance. We'll see Tim Scott fade into the distance. But the thing that I like to throw out there is that he has $2.1 million cash on hand reported the last time there was like fundraising reporting requirements. And so he's going to have a large sort of nest egg to sit on, right? He's going to be able to run ads, and that should keep his pulse somewhat alive. It's not looking good for him. He definitely has some downward momentum coming off of that debate. And it's just that he has a lot of money on hand, so it's going to be really difficult to get rid of him. It's going to be a really long time before he actually drops out of the race. So that's the situation that I see with Tim Scott. Now, while we're at it, I'd like to look over one poll that came out of Iowa. Now, this one was commissioned by the Ron Desantis campaign, so take everything with a little grain of salt, but just because it was commissioned by them doesn't mean that it's going to be completely biased. So this one has Trump at 41, DeSantis at 21, Nikki Haley at 11, Tim Scott at 7, Vivek Ramaswamy at 7, and then Mike Pence at 2%, Christie at 1%, Burgum and Hutchinson at 1% as well. Now, I don't want to read too much into this poll because, again, it is only one poll that came out of the state of Iowa after the debate, but I think one of the bigger takeaways from this is that sort of the rest of the pack is pulling away from Christie and Pence. Now, 1% is pretty bad, and, if this keeps up, if they keep getting poll numbers that come in like this for Pence and Christie, then Pence and Christie could find themselves at the kids' table, right, sitting right next to Asa Hutchinson and Doug Burgum, and that would be really bad for them. Now, another interesting thing that came out of this poll was a head-to-head matchup between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump. Donald Trump had 43% of the respondents, and Ron DeSantis had 40% of the respondents. So Ron DeSantis only down 3% in a head-to-head matchup. It's worth mentioning, right? If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel so you can stay up with all the poll numbers that are happening in the Republican primary. We're going to be right back here next month, so tune in when we see exactly where these candidates are going. Thank you again for watching.